Hello there, and welcome to the third episode of Dev Conversations by Swift Toolkit, where we chat with developers from the Swift community who contribute to the areas of tooling and server side. Today we have two active members of the Swift Server Workgroup, Adam Fowler and Joannis Orlandos.
Hi.
Hey. Hello there. Thanks for joining. Adam is behind Soto, the Swift SDK for AWS, and also the VS Code extension. And together with Joannis, they both just released last month the second major version of Hummingbird, a very popular web framework for Swift. So how are you guys doing?
Doing good. Good. It's been a good month. But it's been nice to hear some of the feedback from the release.
Yeah, and Joannis, you were just at the conference, right?
Yeah, I was just at the Swift Server conference and I spoke to a lot of people. It was nice to hear so many people were already early adopters, both after release, but also a lot of people were already engaged with Hummingbird before it was formally released. So that was nice to hear, and yeah, many people are happy with it.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear. Before we jump to Hummingbird, I just wanted maybe to talk a little bit about Soto with Adam, who's been the person behind it. I remember it had a different name in the beginning, right? Do you wanna cover a little bit how the story went?
Well, when I joined what was the AW SDK Swift at the time, that was about already on version 3. But obviously there was this other company that had a problem with us using that name, where we had, because they may have been developing a similar product and it was their services they were servicing. So yeah, Amazon did come to us and say, can you change the name? And then had a large amount of time trying to work out what we were going to call it.
And there is Bodo, right?
That's kind of like where we came from. But yeah, it's like there's Boto, which is the Python SDK, and then the Rust one at that point was also called. Well, it was possibly called. It wasn't Roto. It was something else.
Okay.
Something similar. Risotto. That's what it was. It was Risotto. So it seemed to make sense to call it Soto.
Yeah, stands for Swift.
Yeah, Swatto sounded awful.
And from the beginning, it was already 100% code generated?
When I joined, it was all code generated. By that point, they were on the verge of releasing version 3. I think it had been in development already 2 or 3 years prior to then. It was started up by a guy called Yuki Takai. I think he's based in Japan. He'd already left the project by the time I joined. So there was, what was it? I'm trying to remember now. Jonathan McAllister was kind of doing most of the development when I joined, and then and then people got jobs. They moved on. They moved away. Sometimes they moved away from Swift, and so it sort of came down to me. And then from then on,
that's when you took over.
Yeah, that's kind of when I took over. And one of the first things I wanted to do was make sure that we were actually producing what the model files were asking for and going through every single possibility. Because up until then, most of the code that was output was code that people were using. They were like, this works for S3, let's do this for S3. But then that would break CloudFront or
something else.
Yeah, so getting that right was a very long project. And then with version 5, Fabian Fett joined us and was quite involved in the designs for splitting the service and client into separate types. And then he joined.
Yeah.
And we released 5, and he then joined Apple.
Apple.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been a while already.
Yeah.
It's been there.
Yeah.
I see that nowadays it has almost 400 targets, right?
Every time I do a new release and I go to start seeing what was the new services that came in, there's always another sort of 5 or 6, and it keeps growing. I think at the time that the Swift package index first properly came online, we were their package with the most targets, which at the time was about 230. I think we're somewhere nearing 350 or 380 now. So
yeah, interesting, nice. And the other topic I wanted to touch a little bit about it is the VS Code extension. You decided to go for it.
This was
how did it?
This was kind of a Swift Server. I'm a member of the Swift Server Working Group, as is
Right.
Joannis. And this was a push from the working group, because one of the issues at the time was there was no IDEs that really properly supported Swift. And you could sort of get some bits and pieces together working on VS Code, but it was never very helpful. And there was always you go out and find a message on the forums to find out how to set it up, and then it was so we made a conscious decision to actually provide a properly supported extension for Fowler and VS Code, and I took on most of that work up until the point where Apple decided to come in and help us.
Nice.
Yeah.
What are the main components of this?
So
spread?
I suppose for the extension, you've got its automatic generation of launch configurations. It has a package. It has the package list dependencies
Package
list.
support.
It's based off Swift PM. It then has a form of the test explorer. It's the main thing is trying to, if it's available in Xcode, and we can do it, we'll try and replicate it in VS Code.
Replicate there. Yeah, but the heavy part is more like LSP, right? The language server protocol and all the interactions for code completion.
Yeah, the LSP part, which we use SourceKit LSP, which is developed by Apple, and without SourceKit LSP, we would have got nowhere. And so that's used by pretty much all of the IDEs that have got some form of Swift support.
Joannis, in your day-to-day, do you use it?
I use it all the
VS
time.
Code?
Yeah. Well, recently it's gotten even better because I'm sure everyone's talked about it. There's this new IDE called Cursor, which is a fork of VS Code with a ton of
AI
niceties.
on top.
Yes, and a lot of AI niceties on top. And well, without a VS Code extension, I wouldn't be able to use Cursor either, right? But also, I use a lot more tools day to day when I use VS Code or VS Code based editors. And it's just so nice to be able to write more than one language in a properly set up environment for me.
Yeah, I'm sure. I personally have a little bit of hard time with VS Code. I feel it like some native UI and maybe keyboard shortcuts that I'm used to them. What would be your tips for people who are used to Xcode? And
the keyboard shortcuts, you can change all of them to whatever you want. Like they're not set in stone. So
it's a setup that someone has to do, but you can even copy the configuration to someone else if you want to share it, right? We do that with VS Code dev containers. We have our entire development set up in one, basically in a repository, so that we all have the same stuff.
And what other tips would you recommend for people who are still not 100% comfortable with VS Code and for tooling and server apps they want to use VS Code or give it a try?
I mean, the most important thing that I think is it's not like a must. You don't have to use VS Code, right? Like most of the packages make it so that the macOS experience is very similar, if not exactly the same with Linux. Of course, you can't use the Apple framework, so you could accidentally import those. But besides that, I think it's nice that the workflow is mostly the same.
I think one of the big things that VS Code has, which Xcode doesn't have, is the whole dev container support. I write a lot of libraries, and having there, you find, obviously, if you're working in now Swift 6, there's a good chance you'll write some code that will break the Swift 5.9 build, and I can roll up a dev container with Swift 5.9 in 5 minutes, and then be working in Swift 5.9 with real ease. And that's made life a lot easier.
Yeah, it certainly helps me as well. But also when I have a customer project, then I always give them a dev container so they can have the exact same version that I was working on. Well, even years later, right, they can reproduce in the exact environment. And it goes down to even setting up the database inside the dev container, right? So almost every backend will need a database. Maybe even some other services like OpenTelemetry, and I include all of that in the same bundle. And that's just one nice... Let's get it set up in a couple minutes, right? Because whether I'm on Windows, macOS, or Linux, I can replicate the exact environment. It's the same.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the advantages of having Docker and even more than like some sort of abstraction by VS Code, right? Like you don't need to have you don't interact directly with Docker, I assume.
You're running inside Docker, basically.
Yeah, but you don't need to run Docker commands manually.
No, you don't. No.
In the last week or two, I've been working on something for the website that is related to Lambdas and DynamoDB. Do you have any tips maybe for people working on who want to test locally?
I believe AWS SAM has a built-in tool to run Lambdas locally. I used it before, although nowadays I kind of deploy my applications in a way so that I can run them as a web server locally and as a Lambda on AWS Lambda. But you can also use AWS SAM to run a local API gateway with your local Lambda.
Nice. Yeah, that somehow takes us to the next subject, which is Hummingbird. Because in this project specifically, I wanted to play around with Hummingbird too, and see how it feels. And I found that it has the Hummingbird Lambdas package, which bridges this gap between how Lambda expects things to run and how Hummingbird expects things to, right? All the routing and converting the payload from Lambda. Yeah, so for people who are new to Swift on the server or they only know Vapor, what are the key differentiators between Hummingbird and Vapor, and where I assumed when the project started, Vapor was already out there. So what were the goals when you started it?
Well, when I started Hummingbird with version 1, my goals at the time are producing something that was a little more lightweight, a little more modular. Vapor gives you everything in one go.
Batteries included.
Yeah.
And it's a very large package, and I wanted to be able to supply something a bit more lightweight. That was my initial plan with Hummingbird 1. Some of the patterns that were used in Vapor, I did replicate in Hummingbird in version 1. I have moved away from some of these when we moved to Hummingbird 2. And then the other thing I wanted to do with Hummingbird was also concentrate a bit more on performance. It's in the various benchmarks. It is considerably faster than Vapor, but then you have to take all these with a pinch of salt, of course, because no one returns the hello world repeatedly from a server.
Yeah.
100,000 times.
Yeah.
Well, with Hummingbird 2, just as I was sort of considering what I was going to do with Hummingbird 2, Joannis came online as well. And there was discussion within the Swift Server Working Group on how modern server frameworks with Swift concurrency would work. And the Swift Neo team had been doing quite a bit of work bridging the gap between their systems and Swift concurrency. And so originally I'd done a small server just to see how it would work out.
Colibri.
Yeah, I called it Colibri, which is a type of hummingbird. And then started using that as a basis for building what became Hummingbird 2. The two of us built that over, I suppose, about 8 months, was it? We took about.
So I reached out to you about needing a next version of a framework, I think around June previous year, so June 2023. And pretty quickly after that, we started sparring a bit about what that would look like. You shared your upcoming version of Hummingbird with me. And if I recall correctly, at first we were kind of thinking about bridging, like doing a gradual move towards structured concurrency where the underlying internals were still Swift Neo in the old form. But we very quickly decided that was not the way forward for Swift on the server. And I think we had our first beta in around January or February of this year.
Yeah, it was January,
which was already like a fully functioning framework. And then we took the next 8 or so months to just refine everything that we could find. I think our example projects are instrumental there, because Hummingbird 1, thanks to Adam, already had a lot of example projects that we could easily translate. And those projects perfectly demonstrated when something was awkward or didn't.
Yeah. I saw, by the way, your talk on the Swift Server conference, which I'm going to add a link to. So there you mentioned you totally get rid of Swift Neo, right? It's 100% async await now.
It still uses Swift Neo for the networking, but it's abstracted away almost entirely internally. There's I think one place where we expose Swift Neo for the networking, but we have Hummingbird features a pluggable has a lot of extension points. The most low level one is the HTTP server itself, which we also use to replace the input and output with aws-lambda support when you use Hummingbird Lambda. But that same system is used for HTTP1 servers, HTTP2, HTTPS, so TLS. And basically, so long as you can receive HTTP requests and send HTTP responses, we're happy.
Nice.
So based on those principles, we have pluggable layers all throughout Hummingbird so that other frameworks can extend Hummingbird. And for the most part, they don't even require knowledge about Hummingbird. Like, for example, the Hummingbird authentication library, while it does integrate with Hummingbird itself, a lot of the core concepts are very easily translatable to a library that doesn't know about Hummingbird, but can still integrate with it through protocol conformances.
And I also saw that on the release note that you moved to the Swift HTTP types package also.
Yeah, it seemed the right time to do it because they've been out, and it would have felt wrong to continue with the Neo types. Unfortunately, the rest of the community are a bit slow in catching up. But I think the only other package, there is OpenAPI at the moment.
Right. So bridging from Hummingbird to OpenAPI is very lightweight because of it. But bridging from the Neo channels into Hummingbird is at this point a little bit more expensive than we'd like.
Yeah.
Luckily, this means that without any public API changes, we can optimize it even further down the line, which is definitely where we're headed.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier the examples repository. For this work that I did now, it was very helpful having many different examples, which are like the blessed way of doing things, and so they're totally helpful. So thanks for that.
It's been
I assume not only for consumers, right? Also for you.
Oh yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think Joannis has already said it's been in actually designing Hummingbird and getting APIs right, having sort of 25 different examples which you have to implement those APIs, and you soon find the edges and the awkward bits, and you sort of can go back and refine a bit more until everything feels right.
Yeah, and even with Hummingbird authentication, which is not released yet, we're still refining that a little bit. And as we're refining it, we're making pull requests to the examples so that we can see if things will stick or not. So before we merge a pull request into a library and publish it, we'll make sure that all the examples are there.
Yeah, makes sense. So besides this repo, what other resource would you recommend someone check that's interested in Hummingbird going to check?
We have fairly extensive documentation which you can link to from both the GitHub repos and the hummingbird.code's website. That has articles as well as reference documentation, so it covers most things. Yeah, the website that Joannis works on, Swift on Server, has quite a number of articles that are Hummingbird based, and there are a few others out there. There's not enough yet, obviously. We need to encourage some more people to write some more articles. Nathan.
And there's of course there's also the Discord server where people are engaging with one another when they have questions.
Nice.
And even if there are not questions, that you can definitely contribute in with ideas or other bits and pieces topics you want to show off.
Yeah, that's nice. It's great to build a community around it. So another thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about maybe is the deployment part, at least for people who maybe are coming from a background of iOS development. Maybe learning Docker, or especially the deployment part might be a little bit a bit of some challenge they need to learn. What are the recommendations you'd have for someone that's new to this whole world of deployment containers and images?
I definitely recommend going with Docker containers or at least some form of container. The nice thing about Docker is that you can reuse a lot of your knowledge about Docker containers to set up dev containers as well. So you can kind of reuse that experience and your developments there. Docker containers are also very easily adapted to like GitHub Actions and other CI systems. And then you can also, of course, reuse that same template and same knowledge and experience for deploying to many clouds. Like virtually every cloud provider supports hosting containers.
Yeah.
So it's very instrumental that you understand that workflow. And in addition to the many resources that are out there about containers, we're also working on deployment guides for this from within the Swift Server Workgroup. Some of those might be going up on swift.org. Others might be going up on our Swift on Server website. And there are definitely other people talking and writing about deployments as well. Of course, we need much more content than we have now, but there's definitely a lot in the works as well.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what I do. My trick is going to the Vapor template repository, which is the repository that's whenever you run the Vapor CLI and create a new project. Mm-hmm. So you go there and it has a nice Docker file. Would you have anything similar for
Hummingbird? Hummingbird has a template as well. There is a template repository which you can either build your own repository of, or you can clone, and then there's a configure script to run in that.
Yeah.
The Docker file in there may be based on the Vapor one, maybe.
Okay.
Gwyn has done a huge amount of work on that, and there's no point replicating it if it's already good.
And I think the template repository currently also already has the dev container set up. So even though you might want to add databases to your dev container, which is optional, of course, you can also do that a different way. But it should be a very easy way to get started.
So we spoke about Vapor in the beginning, and the impression I had until I started playing with Hummingbird was that Vapor is the easiest path to start on, because of its API and because it comes with everything that you need. But I'm not sure about it anymore. Would you agree with that?
So I was involved with Vapor very early on. We have a service that has been running on Vapor since early 2016. That's still running today, and I think that's a testament to how successful server-side Swift has been. But when I worked with Vapor throughout the years, I was part of it. I was a contributor, then a maintainer, and I was a core team member for a while. I created Vapor 3, and back in the day, there were more frameworks, but none of them really took off. And as a function of that, as a result of that, Vapor saw itself as the center of the universe, which I think was the right choice at the time. But we used a lot of design patterns that were very much centered on Vapor itself. And you can still see remnants of that in like how the package structure is, right? So you have leaf kit and leaf, where one is just the package itself and the other one integrates with Vapor.
I think that decision was one of the things that actually has helped Hummingbird, because there are all these packages that are available, which the users of Hummingbird don't have to drop because they're not using Vapor. Things like Fluent. Okay, if the Vapor team hadn't done that, it would have been a lot harder for any other web server to gain ground.
Yeah, that's true. But I think for the most part, those decisions were more backed by the fact that we could run this outside of Vapor rather than with another web framework. So back in the day, we were considering running our libraries on iOS, not with another web framework.
Yeah.
And a lot of these ideas were inspired by that promise that we would make iOS developers' lives easier by bridging into those ecosystems. But Vapor has a lot of we learned a lot about web framework development over the years. Tanner moved on to SpaceX, so that experience is out of the community. But I found that while Vapor is much easier to set up because it's only one import, there are a lot of costs you pay for it. and those costs are compile times, which are frustrating.
Yeah.
Those costs are binary size, which most people don't necessarily care about, but they're still a cost. But there are also bigger costs, like when the ecosystem needs to upgrade to Vapor 5, all those packages need to be upgraded as well. And then I think Hummingbird tries to decouple that more in a way that is more scalable, more future-proof. I hope Vapor 5 will go the same way, even just for their own sakes. And of course, Vapor 4 has been out for a couple of years now.
More than a couple.
More than a couple.
Yeah.
Structured concurrency or concurrency didn't really exist yet, let alone in its current form. So there's a lot of old stuff that needs to be, that needs to be hidden away, but it's still very much impacting the quality of your app and your workflow. Which of course Hummingbird doesn't have that legacy, and that's why I started working with Adam on this project, because this needed an upgrade, right? But there wasn't any.
Yeah, makes sense. I think that in the end of the day, the whole community gains, right? So it's not a competition between the frameworks. It's everybody gains from whoever is developing stuff. Vapor can learn from Hummingbird. Hummingbird can use packages from Vapor, and the community grows as a whole.
Yeah. Well, Tim has already been explicit in saying that he's using a version of the core web server, core server in Vapor 5, at least at the moment. Anyway.
Yeah, it might help in the development, like using specific components and maybe later on replacing them or wherever.
Right. Yeah.
Nice,
we're
cool.
definitely collaborating a lot within the ecosystem, especially through the Swift Server Workgroup, but also around it. Like we're constantly in touch with one another and helping each other move forward. So while Hummingbird and Vapor have certainly two different frameworks within the ecosystem, we're not exactly enemies.
Yeah. To the opposite. Yeah. Cool. Very nice. I think with this positive note, we could wrap up here. We'll leave links to whatever is relevant in the show notes or in the website on links there. If people want to find you online,
well, they can always find me at on Mastodon. I've called up collaboration at mastodon.scot.
Yeah.
It's
and you
a
can find me
link to my past as a photographer.
Mm-hmm. You can find me under my own name on Mastodon or Twitter.
Yeah, and something we maybe didn't mention explicitly is your website, right? That you're publishing together with Tibor.
I'm publishing with Tibor, yes.
Yeah. It's
SwiftOnServer.com.
SwiftOnServer.com. Yeah. So we also add a link for that. Great stuff there. Yeah. So thank you so much for being here. And see you next time.
Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for having us.